All right. Welcome back to Instagram Live on Think Dyslexia. Haven't been here in a while, but I am waiting for my guest. Hello, hello. I'm already seeing people pop in. This is great. I love the support. I am waiting for my guest, Hilderbrand. This is going to be an excellent conversation. I've got my interview questions for those of you who are already joining. Hello and welcome. I'm so excited to do a live. Have not done a live in probably 4 or 5 months, I think. I took a little step back just because I started a new job and I'm not really like quarantine at home anymore. So yes, thank you so much for all of you who are joining. And I'm gonna wait a little bit for my guest. Can you guys hear me okay? Can I get can you guys give me a thumbs up or anything? Or I'm not sure. I'm probably just talking to myself, but it's okay. I like to talk. Oh, hello. Happy birthday. Okay, so here we go. I see that Hilderbrand has joined. Let me see if I can request him in. Let's see here. There we go. Okay. Okay, so I sent you the request. Oh, hey, barely articulating. Oh, all right. Okay. Oh, you know what, Hildebrand? Hold on. Let me see here.
Okay.
I got to get this propped up right. Oh, no.
Yeah.
I think it's cutting me off based on where my camera is. This is the tricky part about doing these lives on your phone.
Right.
Trying to get something you guys are seeing me at my silliest. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to pull back. I'm going to pull back. Can you guys see me okay? Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. All right. Okay.
All right.
All right. Well, let's get this interview started. First and foremost, thank you so much, Hilderbrand, for being a guest here on, I guess, my IG Live TV.
Awesome.
I'm very excited to have this really important discussion with you. But before we begin this discussion, I want to introduce myself to the viewers that are here. I am Dr. Lauren, and I am the owner of Think Dyslexia. I always like to share with the audience that I am an educator, a special educator, and I'm very passionate about dyslexia. I do not have dyslexia, so I don't want to confuse anyone because of my passion. But I do like to bring guests on my page to kind of share either their experience with dyslexia as a person, a student, or an adult with dyslexia, or someone who is like an expert in the field. And so just given a lot of the social justice work that I feel like I've been delving into the past few months, and I just came back from a virtual National Association Independent Schools conference for people of color, I'm just feeling really excited about just this conversation about literacy and what it looks like in the prison system, in the criminal justice system. And I know that that's kind of your expertise. So I think let's get started.
Awesome.
Yeah. So can you introduce yourself and kind of share with our audience a little bit about your journey? I know that you had started off as a physical education teacher in a correctional facility. So how did you get there and where are you now?
Yeah. So sort of like what you just said. So first of all, thank you.
Yes.
And hello to everyone. I'm Hilderbrand Pelzer III. But similar to what you just said, I don't have dyslexia. I'm not a reading teacher. I'm not a reading specialist or anything like that. I went to school for physical education. I graduated from Hampton University in Hampton, Virginia, with a bachelor's degree in physical education. And my pathway was to pursue either a coaching career, athletic director, or work in professional sports. And I, in fact, went back to school to pursue my master's degree in sports management.
Okay.
but I took a physical education job at a correctional facility. First teaching job, didn't know anything about corrections or incarcerated youth. I just needed a job. I was in my early 20s. And so I had a job at a as a physical education teacher in this school inside of a juvenile correctional facility. I taught physical education. I coached the basketball team. I coached the football team and worked with the athletic program. I was on my way. This is what I was pursuing to do. But on days that the principal was away from the school, the assistant principal would take over, like in any other school, and the assistant principal would ask me to assist him. And I would basically move around the building. If things happen, remember it's a secure facility, I would then, deal with those things. But I saw my physical education students in the classroom, the same students who were talented, physically strong, athletic, I could build relationships with through the sports scene. I saw them in the classroom in a different setting, totally the opposite.
Right.
Fearful, couldn't read or write, and those type of things. And it was that really sparked my interest into education. That really inspired me. It depressed me, but it inspired me to want to find out more about why children couldn't read. And from there, I transitioned to ed administration, and I never looked back. It was in that setting that I decided to become a principal.
Okay. So I actually want to touch on something you had stated earlier. One of my questions I was curious about was, what is your experience with literacy? So when you realized these students had trouble or challenges with reading, what was your approach to help them? Did you have any classic training with any Orton Gillingham or any Linda Bell or anything of that nature?
No. So in my early career, what inspired me was to go back to school for education. So I switched from sports management to education administration, and also earned my principal certificate. And so I started out as an administrator in the high school level.
Okay.
And at the high school level, I saw students in the high school level who couldn't read. And when I started out in the late 90s, 2000s, when I first became a principal, that was the time of the No Child Left Behind laws.
Right.
And data was big within the No Child Left Behind rules and laws. And so you had to start really looking at your data. And I saw the data telling me that kids couldn't read, or they weren't reading proficiently. And so in the high school level, you see a lot of excuses. Oh, well, it's the elementary school's fault. Or, well, it's this fault. This is the problem. The fact of the matter is, these were kids who were in high school on their way out of, school and moving on with their life and couldn't read. And so I didn't have any real training, only a strong interest to get myself some professional development. So if the district had professional development, I would participate in that. Reading teachers that I knew, I would talk to them, So it was really about learning that way, more of a piecemeal type of way, and really visiting classrooms and really seeing what was happening. So I didn't have any real training or anything like that. But I read a lot, again, PDs, leadership institutes, all of those kind of things, just to get more interest in what we could do. And so I started learning about the science of reading. I started learning about phonics and phonemic awareness and all of those kind of things, which I know about, but didn't know in the context of how this should look in classrooms.
Right. So that actually brings me to another question. I know I listened to one of your TED Talks on your website. If you have not listened to Hilderbrand speak, you really need to. I think it's impactful and powerful. But you did say in your TED Talk about the idea that teachers at the university level just aren't getting that training. And I 100% agree with you. And I feel like it's truly a systemic issue. So I'm curious to know, as a colleague, what do you think universities need to really prepare those teachers that really go into these teacher prep programs excited, passionate, they want to make a difference, but then it's kind of twofold. They're not fully equipped. They're in the classroom and they don't know what to identify And it's just like this lose-lose for both teacher and student. So what do you think universities need?
Yeah. So to your earlier question, so I learned by visiting classrooms, talking to teachers, talking to other folks, right? And when teachers are able to come beyond their vulnerability, they tell you the things that they don't know and the things that they need help with. And so as an administrator, assistant principal, and a principal, you're responsible for trying to get this kind of help. So you look at what the district offers, you might look at some partnerships and things like that. But along the way, I learned that teachers were struggling with reading. High school teachers, you know, the focus was English, literature, that type of thing. It wasn't really reading, right? That was more in the elementary level. So over the years, as I became a principal of different schools, including the school inside of the Philadelphia prison system, but also elementary school, I started learning also that elementary school teachers were struggling with teaching reading. Also struggling with teaching math, teaching other subjects, right? So they're certified, but they're not necessarily reading experts. And so that got me to really look more deeply into what were the requirements coming out of school for reading. For me, when I came out, I was a physical educator, so I was not even aware of what an elementary school teacher or a reading teacher, the courses they were taking. So as I looked more into that, tapped into other networks, I found that not every university, some do better than others, some of them were not teaching the 5 components of reading. And they weren't touching on that. And that could be for a number of reasons. The professors were unaware of that. The professors were not skilled in that. Perhaps that, you know, the curriculum was an old, outdated curriculum, whatever the case may be. You know, it gets into those things they were calling the reading wars. You should teach it this way. You should teach it that way. And so I realized some schools were not teaching the 5 components of reading. And so teachers were coming out of school or are continuing not having any exposure or awareness about phonics, phonemic awareness, vocabulary, fluency, and comprehension. And so with that, how to assess it, how to measure it, how to inform and plan around it. So if you don't have those skills, then the knowledge that you need to present an effective lesson is not there.
Well, it's interesting that you kind of talk about the content-based teachers, if you will. So I taught elementary school for 4 years in 2 specialized private schools that actually focused more on students with neurodiverse disabilities, more specifically students with dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia. So I started off my career actually getting that proper, you know, the science of reading with Gillingham. When I went into public school, it was just really surprising to me how, oh, I'm sorry, I have a text coming in. I apologize. But it was really surprising to me. And then I moved up to the secondary level, that it was very much like, I'm an English teacher, I'm a math teacher, I'm a science teacher. You know, it was like, well, that's the kind of what you said earlier. Well, the elementary school didn't do their job.
Exactly.
But I had actually been a part of my school district trying to, a lot of angry parents with children with dyslexia, who actually were trying to push and move this along and say, what are these programs that you actually have in place? I don't feel like teachers really know what they're doing. Teachers are kind of admitting, like you said, that vulnerability. I want to do right by the kids, but the school district's paying for this and the school district's for that. And so it's really, I'm finding a very tricky situation. I mean, I've sat at several IEP meetings in the public school district where I'm looking at a child's IEP that says specific learning disability, but I'm reading the data and I'm looking at writing and they're in 8th grade and parents are telling me stories and I'm like, this kid's dyslexic. And I wasn't allowed to say that. And it's just so, I think for me, and I know I've had these conversations, and I think you have too, with Stephen Yearout, with Empower Dyslexia. Like, why are we not preparing our teachers to know what to identify? So then when they are identified in kindergarten, first and second and third grade, they don't end up, you know, finding other negative hobbies to do to end up in the juvenile system, you know? And so there's so many different complexities to that. And I know that there's also that intersectionality of race, class, poverty, all of those things.
Yeah.
And, you know, I'm curious to know your perspective as a Black educator. You and I are both Black educators.
Yeah.
Do you feel educators in general, because data supports, I think, what, 80% of teachers are white female teachers. Do you feel that most educators in the American school district, aside from the literacy aspect, but I mean, that is coupled with it, do you feel like they're prepared to know how to make sure we break the cycle of making sure our brown and Black students don't end up in the criminal justice system? And I know that's a loaded question.
So, no, it's not a loaded question, but it's an important question because it's the elephant in the room. And so teachers, I believe teachers who care about kids, care about their craft, care about looking at data and really seeing kids be successful, white or Black or otherwise, can do a good job. It's about that intrinsic, this is my craft, I'm going to get better, I want to see my students excel. So that's one part. But then there's the other part where folks don't care. Folks don't care about Black and brown kids. Folks don't care about whether they can read or not. Folks, you know, push back on, you know, intensifying reading programs and really looking at data and intentionally planning for individual kids and how the lesson. Folks push back on that. So it is that group that we have problems, that they're in front of our kids. And quite frankly, they shouldn't be in front of our kids. And then the Black and brown issue, white, Black and brown, culturally not understanding our kids, not understanding Black boys in particular. There's a reason why many Black boys and Latino boys are in prison. And you see it at the elementary grade levels. I try to address it within this school to prison pipeline conversation. When I address the school to prison pipeline conversation, I address it from reading. Most people address it from behavior, discipline, suspensions, and expulsion, because that's how we're treating our Black and brown children. Is when they misbehave, we deal with them. We find all types of ways to deal with them, ostracize them, put them out, do those type of things with them. When the reality is they can't read, and the teacher is not being caring enough to make certain that that part of the problem is fixed. And so children then fall out of love with education. They get frustrated. They may do things in the classroom that's disruptive. They may walk out. They may put their head down. They may do whatever they do. And then we deal with it from the behavior aspect. And then we lose them. It's about the reading. And so any teacher who cares about reading, white or Black, will do fine. But if you don't, we got a problem. And there are more white teachers. It's not a secret. It's more white teachers and female teachers that are in the elementary school settings, and many of those neighborhood schools, urban schools in particular, have a lot of Black boys in them. Right.
Yeah, and I think to touch on your juxtaposition of the behavior versus the literacy, you know, if you look at special education statistics, it definitely supports that more brown and Black students, boys, are recommended for special education. And I remember 2-3 years ago, I had a young man who was on my caseload. He came from, I'm in the suburbs of Baltimore. So he came from Baltimore City to the suburban community that I used to work in and live. And his IEP diagnosis and just everything in there was alarming. And so I met this young man, and everything that was in that document was nothing I saw. And so we actually had a 30-day period to assess from the county perspective,
Yeah.
we need to reassess this child. And so we reassessed him, and his disability went from emotional disability, where he had crisis intervention, like he had all the worst kind of support. And really, his disability was, I think, a processing issue, and I think he struggled with reading. And the behavior dissipated. There was no behavior issues.
And that's the issue. So emotional support means people identified or referred them to special education for behavior.
Right.
And once someone like yourself and your colleagues who care about your craft reassessed, looked at that, was urgent about it, and saw something totally different that could help that child be successful. I was talking to, and I have frequent conversations with school psychologists, and in one in particular, and we were looking at a lot of the referrals, right? Really looking at why a lot of parents are asking for referrals and the reasons, permissions to evaluate. And we see that a lot of it is because of reading, right? My child can't read, and parents are requesting special education because they want help. Yes. And they're not seeing the tier 1 instruction in the classroom being effective. Right? They may talk to the teacher. The teacher says, "Oh, okay, it's going to be okay. I'm going to try these things," and it's really not intensive, and they're not seeing any movement. And so when we looked at how we can improve the MTSS process and other support process, the psychologist said to me, "What if teachers could just teach the coding? Maybe we wouldn't have as many referrals." And basically what she was saying is that teachers are struggling with teaching reading. We're not addressing that. We're skimming over it because we don't want to offend the profession. We don't want to offend teachers. We don't want to have this hard conversation about teaching and learning that might hurt some feelings about what we need to do to improve reading instruction. And so for me, it's about reading and literacy. And so my training, no training in terms of Wilson or Orton and those type of things, but it's really about the things and experience I've collected as a leader in schools and what we need to do.
Yeah, and I often feel, and I've said this before, so two things I wanted to address that you said. So behavior. So let's go back to that.
Yes.
I think oftentimes teachers, so how do I say this? When you're in grad school or undergrad for education, you don't really learn classroom management. You might take a class on it, or they might, talk about it for a week. But bottom line is, when you're a teacher, like most jobs, it's a lot of on-the-job training. There's a lot of, depending on if you're in the rural, urban, private, it all varies based on your personality, based on your teaching philosophy, based on the students, the demographic. I mean, it's a lot of complexities. But I feel that you have to figure out your way of classroom management. So if you don't really know how to manage your students, if you start seeing behavior, you're not understanding behavior is showing you something. That's there's a root cause behind that. So in the elementary school level, maybe it is literacy and someone doesn't know how to identify it because maybe they're a young teacher and they're overwhelmed and they're just trying to get through the day and write lesson plans. I mean, there's a whole wide spectrum of that. Yeah. And then by the time that behavior is just tracked throughout the system, and then that kid is in 9th grade, and then it's like, oh, he's been suspended, he's been expelled. That's where when I taught 8th grade, I'm like, we need to look at the data here. This is a problem. I had a student of color who was just screaming out for help, ended up bringing in a weapon to school. It turned out it was a BB gun. And I had a great relationship with him along with my co-teacher because we taught a support class where his math skills were probably at the primary level, and he was in 8th grade. He was too embarrassed to ask questions in class. Right. So this was the environment where he actually could be probably more of his authentic self, but because he was kind of pushed through the system for so long, he was called lazy, all these things, he ended up getting expelled for that incident because it was a cry out for help. He wanted,
absolutely.
He wanted friends. He wanted people. He wanted his parents to pay attention. I mean, it was really sad, and he ended up going to a behavioral school in the county. So it's just like, to me, behavior, I don't want to look at a kid's document and look at data. I want to get to know who they are as a person, and then figure out how we can assess. So that was one piece, and I can't remember my other piece because I just
so while you're remembering your other piece is student teacher relationships, right? They don't teach that in school.
No.
That goes back to caring.
Yes.
It goes back to, and I always tell folks, they're my children, but they're your children. You know, how do you want to treat your students? You know, when they do something wrong, do you want to just send them to the principal and the principal handle it, but they're your students? How do you want to handle your students? You know, and so that building relationships with children, getting to know them, getting to know their family where you can, is most important. But going also back to, and I talk about it in my TED talk somewhat, is going back to reading. When children learn how to read, their reasoning skills, their thinking skills get better. So some other things develop in them. Their awareness, their knowledge of wanting to get more information, right? So all of those things, along with building strong relationships, are the foundations for classroom management. Because over the years, when I look at, particularly when I was an early principal, I used to always read things about classroom management and discipline. I think when I was getting my master's degree, I might have did a thesis on discipline. Like that was like popular stuff to do. And what I found is it always comes back to relationships. Whatever works in your classroom, the way you organize it, your routines, your expectations, how you greet your kids in the morning, recognize all of those things, that's classroom built, is a part of classroom management. So I don't know that is one thing that you should be doing, but if you're willing to care and have relationships and see that they learn under your leadership, they can go a long way.
Yeah, and you know, to touch on that really quickly, relationships are huge. And so, you know, when I was in my private independent schools, which I currently am now, but I'm not teaching, I'm more of I'm the learning specialist for the middle school. So my role is multifaceted to support parents, students, and teachers. But when I was a classroom teacher in private schools, I had 12 kids. So that was those were my kids. I knew the family. I knew, you know, what was going on behind the scenes, if a kid came in with anxiety or didn't do their homework. But I found that one of the biggest things I learned in middle school was these comments. Well, I teach 130 kids. You know, I can't get to know all of them. Or like, well, you know, this student is difficult. Well, you know, they just come in and put their head down. You know, all of those things where I would, you know, hear these comments and my phone is just blowing up. This is just, I hope this is not really on the live. But anyway, yeah, but you know, it was those kinds of comments that I thought it just takes 5 minutes. You can ask a student, hey, how was your basketball game last night? You know, or like, hey, you know, I really noticed you bumped up your math score on that quiz. Let's do this again. Like those small things. And so I always say, kids won't necessarily remember what you teach them. They'll remember how you made them feel.
Absolutely.
You know, and so I think that's a bigger issue that I don't think most teachers, especially the seasoned teachers, especially given 2020, the, you know, COVID, all of this, teachers are burned out. They're burned out. You know, and so it's a lot easier to just be like, whatever, they didn't turn into work. You know, what do you want me to do? You know?
Right. It goes back to that caring. They come in, put their head down, not turning in their work. All of those things are what we call signs, early warning signs of some trouble. And if you care about those signs, those early warning signs, then there are other resources that a teacher could tap into, whether that be the counselor, some external resource, talking to colleagues, whatever the case may be, getting some insight from the principal on a situation. But if you don't bring that situation to the attention of others to help the child, that's where we lose the child.
Right.
So when folks don't care and aren't willing to establish that relationship, we have a problem, or think the problem is not their problem.
Right, right.
Yeah.
So that brings me to my last question, and then I want to see if anyone else has any questions.
Okay.
So you mentioned that educating incarcerated youth should really be important to traditional teachers. And
yes.
I absolutely, when I heard you say that, I said, you know what? Prior to this year and me kind of unpacking my own, journey, I don't think I thought about that.
Yeah.
How do we get that thought on the average teacher's mind? Like, how do we get that on their radar?
Right. It's hard. It's difficult. So let me try to answer this in a twofold way. One, a lot of superintendents, chief academic officers, school district officials are not even aware of students in the correctional setting. And those students went through their schools, okay? That was one of the reasons for me writing my book.
Okay.
Because I had the opportunity to speak at a conference, and after speaking, I had a chance to chat with a lot of superintendents who said, thank you for this information. When I get back to my district, I'm going to check out the county jails and the juvenile justice systems because we have kids there, right? So there is inside of it. So the students inside of a correctional setting, through their actions, through their conversations, through their academic abilities or lack of academic abilities, for the most part, tell us what's wrong with schools.
Okay.
They can tell you about the interactions they had with their schools. They can tell you about the poor teacher relationships they had. They can tell you about their literacy challenges and that they weren't fixed. They can tell you, I couldn't read in second grade, but now I'm 15 years old. They knew I couldn't read, but nothing happened, right? They can tell you these things. And so the information and insight that they have can inform practice. It can help teachers and principals have some look-fors. A prep program that aspiring teachers, particularly elementary school teachers, visit correctional facilities and have conversations as thought partners with incarcerated youth, so that before they enter the public school setting or private school setting, whatever it is, they understand what their responsibility is when it comes to reading.
Okay. No, that gives me some perspective, know, and I think that this is definitely something that's now on my radar.
Yeah.
I want to be thinking about how can I best support public schools and teachers and kind of bringing that awareness. I'm very interested in reading your book. I'm going to definitely check it out.
Let me add this to the TED. So I've always give small speeches. I've traveled to London to speak. I've spoke at conferences. I've spoke locally, small, whatever. But it wasn't until the TED Talk that more people, that platform really tapped into people who were interested in dyslexia.
Right.
And the fact about the literacy. So when you talk about this subject from the incarcerated aspect, folks get turned off. Incarcerated, juveniles, crime, prison. Right. Nobody wants to talk about that. But strategically, once I started connecting and really focusing on the reading, now folks kind of hear what I'm saying. Right. But I've always been saying it, right? But it was that reading aspect from the incarcerated youth's perspective that is so powerful, and more educators, if you care about it, need to look at the prior academic experiences of incarcerated youth.
Right.
And adults that are incarcerated who are in their 40s, 50s, and 60s and still are illiterate.
Right, because I remember you talked about that in your TED Talk. I think it was a man that was in his 50s.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah. He approached me in one of the correctional facilities and scared the heck out of me. Really, I was like, oh my goodness, because you know it's an adult facility. It's over 9,000 inmates in 6 different facilities,
Right.
and I was moving through the facilities, and I'm looking around. He startled me, and I'm looking for correctional officers. I'm looking for the exit. I'm like, it's going to be a problem here,
right?
You know, but I was listening to him at the same time, and he was asking for help.
Right.
He knew I was the principal.
Right.
And so I didn't know him, but he knew I was the principal, and he saw that moment, that opportunity.
Right. To ask for help.
He asked for help. And his help was, he said, I thought he needed help to get into the adult basic ed program or into the GED test center.
Okay.
And so he got really upset. Then he was like, no, I don't need that type of help. I'm still in the Hooked on Phonics program, and I want to get my GED. Wow. And I was like, whoa, This guy doesn't know his alphabet. He doesn't know his letters and sound relationships. He doesn't know, 3-letter words. This was very deep. And so it is a lot of adults who were once our students, right? So they grow up never learning how to read. And I say in the TED Talk how he was carrying the burden of a lifetime of illiteracy. Yeah, that's what he was frustrated with.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm telling you, if you guys have never seen Hilderbrand's work, please check out his TED Talk. It's on your website.
Yeah.
And it's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, I'm looking at the time, and I want to see if anyone has any questions that we can open up. And actually, I'm going to grab my phone and see. I think there were some comments that were dropped in, but because I was so far away, I couldn't see anything. So let's see here. So there's always a reason for these behaviors. Absolutely. This is such a powerful conversation. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's see. SEL is paramount in and out of the classroom. Absolutely. Addressing it from reading. Yep. The pushback is real. Absolutely. These are some really powerful comments, guys. Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if anyone has any questions, and if not, I don't know, Hilderbrand, if there's anything else you wanted to share.
Yeah.
I felt like this was super impactful, but I know that we could talk forever about this stuff.
Let me just share this one story, if I can.
Yeah, sure.
All right. So the Philadelphia prison system at the time was the 5th largest urban county jail system in the United States. It had 6 correctional facilities right on its property. 6 big, large correctional facilities. And so I was in charge of the juveniles who were being tried as adults.
Wow.
Right. So they were going to spend decades or life in a state correctional institution. And so they were receiving a middle school and a high school education. But I also was responsible for adult basic education and the GED test center. And I didn't give the GED test. I was just the chief examiner. I had folks who gave the exams. And one day a social worker came to my office and thanked me and said, thank you for helping my client take the GED test. And I said, you're welcome, right? And I get people saying thank you about GED tests or helping me with this or that all the time. I did. And so it was no big deal. But it was something about this particular social worker, because she came back again and said, when she saw me again, and said, I really thank you for helping my client. And so I went back, like, what is she talking about? And I went back to my examiners to find out, who is this client she's referring about? Who is this adult inmate she's referring about? And they told me who it was. And then I said, well, what's the deal with him? Is his case a big case? Is it is he in the news? Was his crime something that that I wasn't aware of? Like, what's the deal with him? And so I went to find out. And I found out that he was he had just turned 19, 18, 19. And he had just been sentenced to death.
Wow.
And he was going to be transferred to a correctional facility for death row inmates. And when I unpacked it and really learned more, he was thanking her because he got his GED, and it was the one thing he had to offer his mom and family so that they could be proud of him.
Wow.
And at that moment, I always knew, but I even knew more about the power of education.
Yes.
The power that no matter our circumstance, and his circumstance was getting ready to transfer to a death row setting, that education still mattered to him, and that he wanted to get it for himself, but to make his mom proud of him despite all that he did to get into that. And it is also the same for the inmate that confronted me. He was still trying to learn how to read. And so education is powerful.
Right.
And that's what I'm trying to convey when you talk about, well, what can you learn from incarcerated folks? That's what you learn, how powerful this is. And even if incarcerated individuals are hungry for it, our elementary students should be getting it too.
Right.
And so,
wow, that is a very, I mean, I'm seeing the comments here because my phone is right in my face, and I mean, that is powerful. And I think this gives us perspective to not just kind of say, oh, that's a criminal, we don't care, you know, or people that are like, oh, you know, I'm all about the death penalty. You know, I think about Central Park 5.
Right. Yeah.
And Corey, what was his last name? I can't remember his last name.
Yeah.
He was the only one who was tried as an adult.
Yeah. And
the actual person who did it was like, you're in jail for something I did.
Right.
And I just remember watching the Ava DuVernay, you know, on Netflix.
Yeah.
I was crying, weeping, you know, and this was big for me because I'm 33 years old, and I feel like there's a lot of stuff I didn't really know that I'm now starting to unpack and realize, like, of course I knew about Emmett Till and, you know, just history growing up as a Black person, you know these things, but I don't think I really knew about systemic racism until this year. And I just remember watching the Oprah interview that she did with the actors and the real Central Park 5. Yeah. And they basically talked about how their lives, I mean, you know, some of them had more of a positive outlook, but their lives were ruined.
They were ruined. Yeah.
I mean, and the ones that got out when I think they were in jail for 5 or 6 years, they didn't know how to enter the world and date and, you know, go back to school and get their I mean, all these things that it really opened up my eyes to, you know, this is a serious issue where I know there are white people in jail, but I mean, you know, it's mostly brown and Black people, kids, adults. And it's just like, that story is just, wow. I mean, he knew his life had changed, but he still wanted to learn. Yeah.
And I saw that documentary and I saw the Oprah piece, both powerful. But when you ask the question about race and poverty and class, one of the things that I learned, and it's the same, I would imagine, with the Central Park 5, resources. Yes. Not having resources to defend yourself. Yes. Right? Where other communities have access to those resources, or people will even pay for you to be defended. Right. But Black and brown children, I saw it a lot of times, particularly with the juveniles being tried as adults, that their trial would last a day. And you get 30 years. Yep. Right? Yep. Not weeks, but a day. You know, they go, you say, where John went to court today, and John doesn't come back. You know, John, you know, only thing that comes back is the word. Right. You know, John, they sent him up, and he went from there up to, you know, state, 30 years, life. Not having resources, you know, bail reform, all of those things are so important in this criminal justice reform piece, but also having education in these settings. Right. Quality education in these settings is so important too.
Well, and the last thing I want to say about Central Park 5, I remember watching this, and it was the scene where the white prosecutor was going in on Corey, and she preyed on the fact that she could tell he didn't know what she was saying. She starts bringing up some real big words, and she starts using the word truancy, and he had no idea what that meant.
Yes.
And he's just like, I don't know, and he's getting defensive, probably anxious, upset, not knowing what's going on. And this woman just attacked that and ate it up. And I was so, as an educator, I was like, I am so upset. This kid is 16 years old, and his life has changed forever.
So associate that back to the science of reading.
Yes.
And the 5 components, the vocabulary component.
Yes.
Like the words you know and understand help you think, right?
Yes.
And if you don't know words, fluency,
you
right?
Can't.
And right, it goes over your head. And Corey, he got the longest sentence.
He did.
He I don't know it to be a fact or not, but just based on the documentary and everything, he seemed like the others may have had more educational experience than him, right? And so that is the one that really gets railroaded. It goes back to that education. And even if he was receiving special education services, so often, not all, because I've seen some great special ed teachers over the years, my goodness. But so often you might have special ed teachers who don't understand reading.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Yes.
So even though you're getting those services, doesn't mean that the reading improved.
No.
And see, he didn't know the word truancy. That changed his life.
It really did. It really did.
Yeah, devastating.
This is such an impactful conversation, and I'm looking at the time, and I don't want Instagram to just kick us off.
Not a problem.
So I want to say, Hilderbrand, thank you so much for being a guest on my IG Live. I think you know, this was impactful here, and I know people are going to be viewing this at their leisure. Awesome. So thank you so much, and thank you. Yeah, everyone who's been here to support us, and I hope that we can do this again sometime.
Awesome. I hope so too. Thank you so much. This is my first IG Live. Thank you. I feel good now. And so I'm glad we connected. Listen, that's right. I'm glad we connected, and I'm glad you connected with me, and I've been just enjoying your posts and everything that you do.
Thank you so much. And I look forward to seeing your work in the future too.
All right.
All right. Have a good afternoon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.